Thank you for tuning in. This is episode number 2 of the Mountain Strong podcast, and this is a conversation that I had with Will Frantz. Will is one of the coaches who works with me at Wasatch Fitness Academy. I've known Will for something like 2 years now, and in addition to coaching classes and doing private coaching at Wasatch Fitness Academy, Will is also a nutrition coach. And full disclosure, Will is, as of this moment, late March of 2021, Will is actually my nutrition coach. And he and I have a call scheduled for later today to kind of talk about how things are going. And the reason why I wanted to sit down with Will and capture a conversation and share this with you all, I started personal training and coaching nutrition years and years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, if not a little bit longer. And while I was given a really good toolbox of things to work with and have done really well with clients that I've worked with, I've often struggled on my own. And the reason for that is really threefold. First is, it is super easy to get lost in all of the information that is out there. And when you're a nutrition coach and you kind of like read this kind of research, then all of a sudden there's tons and tons of information. And I have enough going on in my life that I didn't have the time to parse out all the information for myself. Somehow I was able to actually pull out the right things for my clients and, get my clients really great results. But for myself in my own life, I'd often struggle. The second big thing was that I started to construct in my head all of these narratives as to why I was struggling to lose the little bit of body fat that I wanted to lose. And I, was like, is it hormones? Is it stress? Is it sleep? Is it all of these things? And the answer is yeah, kind of, but there's also some basic stuff that really matters. And I was struggling to actually go back and just take care of the basic stuff. So that Will has been really great for me there. And then the third thing is consistency. The human machine functions best with consistency. When the brain and the nervous system can predict that yesterday and tomorrow and the day after that are all going to look relatively similar, then that reduces stress. And that kind of consistency is actually incredibly helpful. One of the clients that I've been working with for many, many years, and who's a good friend of mine as a climber and a skier, he lost somewhere in the realm of 20 or 25 pounds over the last 3 months. And it felt like the easiest thing that he's ever done. And he is actively confused why all of his efforts in the past hadn't paid off. And what shifted was that he started tracking what he was eating. He was getting support at home for tracking what he was eating. His wife was actually cooking a lot of the meals and inputting what she was cooking into MyFitnessPal. So it was super easy for him to just include that and lock that. We got him really consistent with protein, and then we got him relatively consistent with calories. And then all of a sudden it became super easy to dial stuff up and dial stuff down. And it's this model, man, I got to tell you, this model is really, really unsexy. There is nothing sexy about eat enough protein, eat reasonable amount of calories relative to what you do, tweak the calories between fat and carbs, and, generally eat the cleanest food that you can manage most of the time. Limit processed foods. These ideas are not particularly sexy. No one's going to write a book on this, but it tends to be the thing that works for people. And as soon as we can start obsessing, as soon as we can stop obsessing, things tend to go better. Anyway, one of the things that Will and I both know is really true for a lot of folks, especially endurance athletes, or in terms of my clients who are kind of gravity sports athletes, especially climbers, mountaineers, and skiers, where they have to move their body in space, like uphill, or they're fighting gravity constantly. It's also true for runners and cyclists to a slightly lower degree. There tends to be an obsession with body fat, with body weight, and that can lead us to under-eating for long periods of time. And under-eating for long periods of time can have really devastating effects to the metabolism. And if the metabolism is really out of whack from being in a caloric deficit for super long time, then we need to do something to reset that. And we can be losing, our weight could be stable, but we actually might be losing muscle mass in exchange for water mass. And again, this kind of comes down to stress hormones. So I'm going to leave it there, but let's get this rolling. So this is a conversation with Will Frantz. the topic that we're talking about really is like about endurance athletes eating enough. And how do you know if you're eating enough? And in the case of someone who wants to clean up their nutrition, even if it's just a tweak to get a few degrees better, a few degrees cleaner, a little bit faster, a little bit healthier overall, because maybe you're looking not just at the performance this season, but your lifetime of performance and your lifetime of being able to do stuff with your kids maybe. And it's kind of relevant to me these days. Like, I want to live forever because my son is 4 months old and is cute as shit. And like, I want to have a lot of time with him. So enjoy this conversation. Will's contact information will be in the comments below. If you have anything that you need from him, feel free to shoot him a message. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, do all the rest of the YouTube things. I'll see you guys later. So our topic for today, and I'm Michael, and this is Will, obviously. And our topic today is, are you eating enough? And this comes up a lot because it's a place where I think people can really easily get into their own head and think that, what they're eating, like get really wrapped up in what they're eating and in food quality and GMO and organic. And it's easy to miss the trees for the forest, or the forest for the trees sometimes, in a way of, we're looking to improve our lives. We're looking to feel better, look better, move better, perform better. And the problem becomes that we, maybe are not eating enough, or we're maybe eating too much. And actually getting energy intake right is a pretty big deal for balancing hormones, for balancing stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline in the body. And, if we're really far off from what we should be eating in terms of amount, well, then there's some pretty negative things that could happen. Does that, as a starting point, Will, do you agree with those ideas?
Yeah, I'd say you nailed it. And then the other thing is just like, it's really hard to know because of our modern food environments. We're going to talk a little bit today about like how to figure that out and everything. But yeah, if you're not eating enough, you're not going to achieve your goals. And enough could mean a bunch of different things, and it's very goal dependent, but absolutely you nailed it across the board.
So in the realm of mountain athletes, in the realm of skiers and mountain bikers and cyclists, why, like for someone who's not primarily concerned about physique, fat loss, muscle gain, for the people that you and I spend a lot of our time talking to, why is how much we eat so important, right? Like, does it not just work to go off of hunger cues? Like, why should a runner, for instance, be pausing and thinking about how much they're eating?
Yeah, let's hit that from two ends. So why is because if you care at all about performance, you need to be eating enough to actually fuel that performance. Because our food's delicious, it's great, it's a source of pleasure. Like, it's honestly, food's one of my favorite things in the world. But it is also fuel. We're literally made up of the things that we eat. And if we are not eating enough, eventually we just break down. And if we care about performance, if we care about like skiing better, mountain biking better, getting a better time on that run, then we need to fuel that well enough to actually provide that result. And then as far as like going off of hunger cues, I mean, yeah, that'd be ideal. But there's a couple things that kind of mess up that process some of it's our dietary history, right? So if we've gone on this long series of diets in the past, which a lot of us have in an effort to lose weight or to perform better or to improve whatever the current trend is, they often involve a pretty aggressive calorie deficit. And if we don't come out of that appropriately, we actually end up messing up our hunger signals because it's all hormonally based, so it kind of damages our hormones. If we come out of it too fast, our body goes into panic mode and it will actually create some new fat cells. This is called body fat overshooting. And we end up with more fat like storage capacity than we even started with, which also messes up our hunger cues. There's some roundabout hormones cycling. And then we also are in this food environment where ultra processed foods, hyper palatable foods are like, I probably could get to one in about 10 seconds if I were motivated enough. And I could get to about 1,000 of them in about the 10 minutes it takes me to get to Harmon's. And with all of that hyperpalatable food, they're very high in calories, they're pretty low in nutrients, and they don't fill you up very much. So if you eat 1,000 calories of pizza versus 1,000 calories, which is a slice and a half of Costco pizza, or if we eat 1,000 calories of steak and broccoli, which is a lot of steak and broccoli, one, you're going to be very full, and the other, you're going to be like, still a little peckish. And that's why hunger signals are not necessarily great. It all depends on food choices in our history.
Yeah. You said, we were talking about on the question of why endurance athletes, mountain athletes should care. And we've got to think of it as, I think we need to think of it in terms of two different components. And one is training and the other is performing.
Yeah. And,
training is the things we do to go get better. And the nature of training is that it demands recovery. And, it's cliche at this point, but still true. It's like lifting weights doesn't make you stronger. Running doesn't make you faster. It's the recovery from the demands on the system that yield adaptations. And the adaptation is faster, stronger, right? It's these things. And that recovery is in its own way expensive in terms of nutrients. And
yeah.
if we're, the person who's in the gym crushing themselves under is just doing really, really hard strength training workouts, and is like eating enough, like they think they're eating enough because they feel fine through those workouts. And this is kind of my history of like, man, I know how to fuel a workout with like the right amount of scratch, like basically sugar, the right amount of sugar to get through that workout and feel really good. And there's nothing hormonally wrong for me in taking that approach. I don't end up with sugar cravings. Like I'm doing fine for that, but it's the afterwards, do I put in enough high quality fat, protein, carb in order to build the structures that should be the response to the workout? That's going to determine whether or not there's any progress over time.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So the problem with hunger signals, you said, is we live in an environment of hyperpalatable foods. And then if we've been in a calorie deficit long enough, right? In other words, if we've been eating so far below our calorie needs for some length of time, hormones, cortisol, all of these markers and signalers can get kind of screwed up. How would someone know if they've been in that condition of living and training way under calorie intake needs for like some length of time? Like, how does somebody know if that's, someone's listening to this, or how they're like, yeah, you know what? Like, I feel fine. I'm not losing fat. I'm not losing weight. I'm not gaining weight. Like, I'm probably eating at maintenance. Could they be wrong?
Yeah. Good question. Yes, they could be wrong. Short answer. There's a few big signals, and I like to talk about the physiologic signals first. We call them biomarkers, whatever. If you're not seeing progress, even though your training is increasing or you think you're doing all the right things, like if Michael's programming is very good, if you're following that programming and it's not giving you any results and you think you're eating enough, there might be something else going on. Could be sleep, the big one for me. It could be that you're not eating enough, even though you think you are. So we have something going on there. The other thing is I'll use this former client as an example a little bit down the line, but basically if you have this cycle where you're constantly training, say you're prepping for a marathon, and when you finally get to that phase where you're trying to do the 20-mile run occasionally to see how you're doing, and that's when you get injured every year, you're probably under eating or something is not going correctly. Like, your training could be bad. You could be pushing yourself too hard. Again, you could not be sleeping, but it's also very likely that as you've increased that volume and intensity, that we've also not increased food to support that. And so those are a couple big signals. Then we should also feel good. We should be able to get up. Like if we're sleeping an appropriate amount and you still feel like you're dragging every day, that's another big one. Because at some point our food should be fueling our work. And if we're not giving ourselves enough food to fuel our work, we start leveraging hormones, which is like my entire history. And as soon as cortisol is an amazing hormone, it will get it done. We evolved with it because it allows you to run from the lion, man, but it's supposed to be short-lived. If you're doing that every day for a few years, you're going to break down. So that's those are a couple of the big signals there. And we can get into numbers and some actual technical ways to assess this, but like those are why you even might consider having the chat.
And the other, you were talking about the marathoner who at mild, they're 2 months into training and their long run is a 20, and they know from the last 2 training cycles, the 20 miler is the one that, causes shit to start to break down.
Yep.
One of the mechanisms there can be as simple as you've put all of this strain into your connective tissue, into the tendons and the ligaments, and those structures grow really slowly and they heal really slowly. They don't have a big blood supply. Evidence of that is you look at a chicken breast, and like there's the pink of the chicken breast that is muscle, and there's the like white stringy bits that are tendons and tendons connected to that muscle. Well, tendons are white because there's no blood flow.
Yeah,
and that runner has been like they're probably eating at maintenance for most of their training, but as their training increased and they were getting closer to the race, maybe their thought process is, hey, it would be really great to be 5 pounds lighter for marathon day. And so they start cutting back on calories, or they start watching the scale more like with a lot more consistency, and they start pulling their weight down by eating less and burning a ton of calories. But part of what's happening is those structures that need to rebuild don't get a chance to. So it's I would love for no one to ever get to mile 20 of the marathon training and be like, oh, I guess I'm actually not eating enough. Hopefully we can figure that out earlier.
Yeah.
But it's just to say that the cost of being in an energy deficit for a really long time is more than how you feel. Like it can be how you feel, but like you might be okay suffering through a couple of bad weeks if you're going to go PR at the marathon. Like I get it. You might be okay with like having 0 sex drive for the 2 weeks before the marathon and like just being hungry all the time, because that's fine. But if the thing you're doing, you can't do it because your tendons didn't have enough materials to like rebuild, that's probably not awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I mean, every athlete is wrecked after the Olympics, right? Like that's not news, and none of us here are Olympians, but we're still trying to push ourselves to our limits. So you end up with the same issue, and you should be going into that race pretty well fueled, but you're going to be a little tanked, and you might end up needing to leverage your cortisol a little bit at the race. Honestly, some people see their best PR if they can make that cortisol leverage like perfectly timed with that. Like, somebody I follow is Ben Greenfield. Like he hit his best race on keto, but then it took him like 6 months to recover, and he probably just leveraged cortisol. He also like had an amazing fat metabolism for endurance work, which is super helpful. But when you're recovering for 6 months after an event, something probably wasn't great. So yeah, it's kind of one of those deals.
It makes me start thinking about all the times in my life that I've gone through my like 2 to 3 day crash period of just like, and one of the first ones I can remember, this was several years ago, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was traveling for work, and while I was traveling for work, I decided that I was going to go back to keto, but functionally it was like Tim Ferriss's, 6 days strict, one cheat day. And I was doing that, and I started, like I got home and I basically started into a training program 7 days a week, 300 swings, 20 pull-ups, pistol squats, goblet squats, a couple other movements. And it was like a comfortable 75-minute workout. It was really fun. I would do 150 swings straight. I'd break those into sets, but I do 150 swings. And then the other 150 swings I'd break into sets of 15. And every 15, I would do 2 sets, a set of 10 of something else.
Yeah.
And like my pull-ups got better, my swing got better, my grip got better. But I could only hold that rhythm for about a week. And then it tanked. And I think I suspect this is what it was that, at that point, like the language in CrossFit was adrenal fatigue.
Yep.
But I suspect we're not talking about anything too terribly different.
No, it's the same thing. Adrenal fatigue's kind of gone out of fashion because like proper adrenal fatigue is a problem. Like we need to test cortisol levels, and they're probably low all the time. Like that's where we get, and it's actually really rare. But the old phrasing would be like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 3 is pretty much what's qualified as like adrenal fatigue. And that means you've been tanking yourself for a while. I've actually probably experienced that a couple times in my life, but don't have the testing to back it up. I was just really a dick to myself for like over a decade. But they're stage 1 and stage 2, like that's absolutely a form of what we'll call like HPA axis dysfunction. It's the hypopituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. And like all these things are not working well together. And basically you've leveraged your adrenal hormones, so adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol so much that they're not working properly anymore. And this is where we end up with weird sleep cycles, or like some exhaustion at the wrong times of day, or like you're wired at night and tired in the morning. Like all of these things are good signals.
Yeah, and Will and I don't bring this up to either A, scare people, or B, suggest that like, man, you've really effed yourself up.
Yeah.
But it's more that the line between, like, in a lot of ways, it's like these dysfunctions regarding cortisol levels or cortisol curves become the simplest explanation for a lot of things that seem like they're just not working right. Like, yeah. If you're, if I'm talking to someone and they've been on a good training plan and they've been consistent with that training plan, and they were getting stronger and they stopped getting stronger, and they plateaued for a while, and like even a deload, like they couldn't get past it. Well, like, okay, if you're following, it's a good program. You're being compliant with the program, like you're doing the work. Okay, how's your food? How's your eating? And and it's like, well, yeah, they're not eating more, they're not eating enough. It's like, well, we're probably starting to talk about a little bit of this cortisol dysfunction if it's a long enough timeline. And it's not that you have to go get blood work done, but it's that at some point you've got to look at how everything lines up, how movement and food line up, and be sure that you're realigning those things once in a while. And I mean, this is, in a way, like this is what a deload week is. It's an opportunity for those hormone levels to reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. So we've talked about why endurance athletes should be asking the question, are they eating enough? Some of the indicators of that being a no. If someone is worried about themselves, where do they start? Like, and this is well before like, hey, Will's a coach or I'm a coach. Like, it's well before talking to a coach, but it's like, what are the things that somebody watching along at home could do to start answering this question for themselves, or start this process for themselves?
For sure. Yeah, and this is actually where I start with all of my clients regarding food, and I usually have them do it or even start this process like before we technically start working together, right? So like this is where we jump off. This is how this works. So the easiest way, right? Like we could go to a lab and get our basal metabolic rate done through a bunch of testing. It's annoying and a pain, and you don't really need to for the most part. But that is one option. But we could also just use an equation. And just to define some terms real fast, your BMR is pretty much the amount of calories your body uses on a daily basis to stay alive. So if you laid in bed all day long, like that's kind of what you would burn. And it's a lot. On top of that, we end up with what's called like total daily energy expenditure. So that's the amount of calories you regularly burn on a daily basis. And your BMR is the large chunk of those calories for most people, unless you're like a professional athlete. So we can get an equation. They're all kind of the same. The one that I think has been shown to be the most accurate is called the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. And it's like Mifflin Saint and then Jeor, and I can link this in your materials later. But you find it online, you plug your thing into a calculator, it should kind of tell you what your BMR is. And then you take a guess on your activity, and you can apply an activity multiplier. So 1.2 is for very sedentary. That's like you get up out of bed, you go make the coffee, you sit in your car, you sit at your desk, you sit in your car again, and then you sit on the couch, and then you go back to bed. that'd be your like 1.2 activity multiplier. And then if you are a construction worker who also does gym training, that would be like a 2 on activity multiplier. So that's how we kind of judge there. And that will give you a basic estimate of how many calories you should be eating on a daily basis. To be clear, it's not completely accurate, but it'll get you pretty close, and that can give us an idea. So that'd be step 1. Go find that equation online, estimate your activity. And this is average, like, oh, I train on Mondays, but I don't train Tuesdays. Should I eat different? It doesn't matter. Like, your average activity over the course of the week, we'll use that for the multiplier, and we kind of figure out what our average calories should be on a daily basis. And then step 2, we actually figure out what we are currently eating on a daily basis. So you download a calorie tracking app. I personally like Chronometer. It is not full of ads. It does not try to sell you things other than their upgraded service. But like the industry standard is MyFitnessPal, which is also great. There's about 1,000 more of them. So pick one, and you set your goal to maintain weight. Doesn't matter what your goal actually is. Set your goal to maintain weight, because the app doesn't know you and you don't want it like adjusting your food preferences for now. You estimate your activity level to whatever you think it may be, and then track your food for 2 weeks. And don't make any changes to your diet. If you eat pizza every day, keep eating pizza every day, because we're trying to get an assessment of what you're doing now. We're not trying to like be good for the app. We're trying to be accurate and get a baseline. And do not plug your exercise into the app either. Like, do not make those adjustments. Just figure out, put in your info, set maintain weight, make an estimate. If anything, overestimate your activity, because just a bit of psychology, as soon as the red number comes up that says like you're eating too much, you tend to stop eating, even though you normally would have continued. So if anything, just overestimate it, because it doesn't matter for now. And then just do your best. Say you go to Cafe Rio and they don't have that in the app, plug in a burrito from Chipotle. It's close enough. If you make a lot of your own food, track the steak, track the oil. Maybe if you find it super burdensome, don't track all the spinach. Like, you're not going to get the micronutrients or fiber data, but you'll understand, like, spinach, you could eat a bag of it and it'll adjust your calories by like 200. It's fine. So like, do your best and do that for 2 weeks, and then figure out the average. So add up all the calories over 2 weeks and then divide it by 14 and you'll figure out your daily average of calories. And then we have a rough idea of how much we're eating on a daily basis and a rough idea of how much food we should be eating from the equation. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. So in other words, it is use the equation at the beginning. Well, you could even do the equation as step 2, right? Because we're not using the equation in the app, but it's get a baseline of what you're doing for 2 weeks, so that we can look at calories and look at calories relative to activity level as well. Sure. Right. The other goal would be for those 2 weeks, don't go to the gym more, don't go to the gym less. Like, make it as an average 2 weeks as we can. Mm-hmm. Then compare your data to what the calculator would suggest, the equation would suggest.
Yep.
And then then I'm going to guess that what we're doing is using that, we're using that to establish a baseline.
Yeah. And I missed one step. You should also be taking your weight on a regular interval here. You could do weekly. If it's not going to send you in a spiral, daily would actually be better. 3 times a week will do well, but like same time of day, same conditions, wake up, take a pee, take your weight. And if your weight doesn't change, then you actually did a very good job of assessing your baseline. And like a half a pound here and there is fine. But like if you gained 3 pounds in 2 weeks, then you're probably eating in a surplus, etc. But like if your weight stayed stable, then that's your checking mechanism to know that we actually ate the way we have been.
And if someone is in kind of a dysfunctional cortisol state, what would they be most likely to see as the outcome of this, right? If they're, yeah.
So you have these two numbers now. Theoretically, equation wise, what you should be eating. More or less what you have been eating on a daily basis, and we know whether that's pretty close to maintenance, right? Like we have that. And if those numbers are close, happy day, because it's kind of ideal. And we're talking close, like within 200 calories is probably right. Like everybody has some fluctuation in their metabolism. If we have been leveraging cortisol or doing some like under eating for a long time or causing issues, we're going to see a pretty large disparity in those numbers. And if you didn't greatly misjudge your activity level, I see that sometimes. Some people think they're like a 2 on the activity scale when they work out 3 times a week. That's an easy fix. But if you accurately assessed your activity, more or less, and we're still seeing a huge disparity in those numbers, then something's going on. And this is where I'll talk about like the 20-mile injury client. We did this initial assessment, and he was basically under eating by 1,000 calories a day and never felt hungry, never felt like it wasn't losing weight. But there was this massive disparity in his projected calorie output and his actual calorie intake, which means he'd been doing this for so long that his body, it wasn't a broken metabolism. I said this the other day, but like it's not a broken metabolism. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to. Your body's supposed to keep you alive. So your metabolism will adjust down if you keep under eating to keep you alive in the long run. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, but it's not actually serving you at your current time. So if we see this big disparity, we need to try and bring those numbers closer together. They might not ever match, and that's okay, but we need to get them as close as possible, as close as we can, because, for example, that client, he's not just under eating for his incredible activity level. He's running every day and trying to train for a marathon. He wasn't even eating the amount of calories that he would need to eat to theoretically stay alive. Like that's kind of what, like he's eating under his BMR by 500 calories on a daily basis. And then adding marathon training on top of it. Like, of course he got injured every year. Like that's not a duh. So like, and we do this all the time. It's no judgment for him. Like he'd followed diets in the past. He lives a very stressful lifestyle. He's just active. So he's over leveraged himself and he had no idea. So it's not, his fault, but he did it. And the good part about that is like, he could fix it too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. So get a baseline in terms of food, get an estimate of calorie intake, daily calorie intake needs from a calculator, compare the two, consider what weight did. Ideally weight stays flat for those 2 weeks, because that's going to imply that you are being consistent with usual behavior patterns. And then if those two numbers are fairly close together, then you're in that state of, if you want to lose a little bit of body fat, lose some weight, pull that, set your calories to be 400, down by 400 calories or so. You want to gain muscle, gain some mass, set them up by 400 calories. You want to maintain where you are, like keep it as is. But the concern is, and then this becomes the flag for the cortisol thing, which is if the calorie estimate and what you're taking in are way different, and you're maintaining body weight, then we're probably in a story of being way over leveraged. Is that a good summary?
Absolutely. And to be clear, like this is not a rare situation. It's a little more rare for athletes because for a long time they can kind of eat whatever they want. But for anybody who's had any efforts with weight in the past, this is really common. Like over half the people that I work with, we need to spend some time restoring caloric maintenance first. So this is super common.
Yeah. Yeah. And and it's, and I think of the people that I know and that I work with, for like every single one of my clients wants to be stronger or faster or get a better score on the Marine Corps, the 2 physical fitness, the two fitness assessments that the Marine Corps uses. But none of them leaves like body weight and body fat totally out of the conversation. Like it always shows up. And so it's really easy just to imagine the human psychology that says, like, yeah, I really do want to have like, I want to be the woman on base who does more pull-ups than all the guys. Like, I really, really want that. I also would love to lose 10 pounds. And I think once we start, I see this at least, once we start chasing two goals like that like you can have them both, you probably need to like focus on one and then focus on the other, recognize that there's a balance. But thinking, well, I'm just going to do a lot of pull-ups and cut my calories down is probably the exact way to get in the situation that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And it is this like chasing multiple goals at once that tends to end up with an issue. And if we're okay going really slow, we can kind of do that. You can eat into maintenance with the right combination of foods and the right amount of training, and the body will slowly change. But like if we have 100 pounds to lose, we need to realize that all of the lifting is like keeping you strong enough while we lose weight. If we're trying to prep for a marathon, like you might lose your six pack, and that needs to be okay. If you really want to do well in that marathon, you can get it back. Like it doesn't mean it, like we can get it back right after the marathon. That can be next goal number 2. But if we're trying to qualify for Boston, and you really want that, that needs to not be at the top of your mind. That needs to be okay.
Yeah, I watched a few minutes of a really interesting interview with I think it was Steffi Cohen, who has got who I think has set the world's record. She's definitely set the world's record for a women's deadlift at her body weight in a certain
I love her so much. God, yeah. I love her so much.
Yeah, she was interviewing Matt Frazier, who's won the CrossFit Games for the last several years. And, so two incredible athletes. And I think, I think this was the Steffi Cohen interview with him, but he was asked about like body image and body fat and physique. And, and he acknowledges that he's had his own struggles over the years as an athlete and like spent time where like having a six pack was the big thing. But he has said, he tries to show up for the CrossFit Games, and for anyone who's not paying attention, to CrossFit, which is totally fine, you don't need to, but the CrossFit Games will be 7 or 8 days of events with 2, 3, 4, 5 events in a day. And, it's like they may have a really long trail run or a mountain bike ride. Then they need to get back and they have to deadlift real heavy. And then they get a little bit the next day, they got to get up and run 5 miles in body armor. Like it's just a ton of work. And Frazier has said that his strategy is to always show up with some extra body fat. And everybody that he sees who gets there and is super lean on day one, they just don't have the stores in reserve in order to make it and to do well. And they're getting gassed on day 4 and day 5, where he's just kind of like hitting his stride. And it's, he's an incredible athlete. He trains a lot. He trains really hard. He's really strong. He's definitely gifted. He is probably genetically different than a lot of us. But, this idea of, chasing performance rather than chasing physique. Like if you really care about performance, chase performance. And the flip side of that is like, if what you really care about is physique, go there. If you're like, I really want 6 packs and I want a dozen pull-ups. It's like, yeah, but which is more important? Which is really going to bring you more joy across the board? And if the answer is, man, like the pull-ups are going to look good when I'm at the gym, but the 6-pack looks good 24/7, that's more important. Then make that your first priority and let that be your cornerstone. And if you're like, no, I want to crush it at the gym and 6-packs are nice, but not that important, then you can always have 6-packs for 4 weeks a year when you're on vacation at a beach in Florida. There's definitely a timing and periodization component to this.
For sure. I mean, we periodize our training. We should also periodize our nutrition, and they should probably coincide with one another. That'd be the best way to do that. But if we like you can increase the pull-ups and you can have the six-pack for that summer. Like I work at a ski resort. I am in long sleeves and long pants like all winter. I don't really care what my abs look like. They're there. I'm a little vain, but they definitely take a hit in the winter. And that's when I tend to put on more like muscle mass. And then come summer, I try and cut a little fat and it just cycles. And there's a very healthy way to do that. I know most people try to do that, but we don't do it well. But there's a very like healthy way to make that happen. And it involves periodization of both our training and our food.
Yep, absolutely. Well, maybe the next time that we chat and record one of these talking about food, maybe that's where we end up going is how to periodize nutrition across the year or across the season.
Yeah, I'd love that for sure. It'd be a super useful thing for people to hear, because I feel like most of us try to eat the same all year round and yet change our training, which really doesn't make sense. But it's what we do. And again, nobody's fault to have been taught to do, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't work. All right. So guys, we're going to wrap this up. Will, thank you. And if anybody, where this is posted, whether you're looking at this in YouTube or in Circle, if you've got questions, comments, things you want to talk about, drop them below. I'll also, if you've got anything that questions you want to ask to Will, if you're in the Circle community, you can just tag him in a post and he will get back to you.
For sure.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. See ya.